My first guest on this Magnificent Monkey podcast was born in Namibia in 1975. He studied at the University of Natal, which became the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Studied at Rhodes University, Wits University, and the University of Stellenbosch. He's a self-employed research, analysis, and strategy consultant, specializing in research-based advisory for those doing business in African countries. Welcome to the Magnificent Monkey podcast, the Desert Island Disc Special. My friend, Dr. Shaun Rogers.
Thank you very much. This should be fun. I'm intrigued.
Interesting. Something I've been thinking about, and it's been troubling me, is I can't remember how we met. Now, I know we must have met at Maritzburg Varsity on the first stint, which for me was 94, 95, 96. But I literally cannot remember being introduced to you. I cannot remember how we became friends. I know that on the second run, that I remember, I remember I can see you across the quad and thinking, fuck, that's Shaun. But how, do you remember how we met?
Clearly, very, very clearly, which is quite a surprise. It's a story you'll recognize when you hear it. I was at Livonia Primary with Stephen Enderley and hadn't seen him, didn't know him or anything like that. And then we were in Miller's. And
interesting.
I don't know who recognized which of us, because I finished 93, but I was at Treverton for a year and then sort of a gap year, and then I came. So I hadn't really seen him, and I think you guys were in first year together, so you guys were in second year. And then I was talking to Stephen, and you came over and you said, do you want to go and smoke outside? And the three of us went to go and smoke outside, and we went in to what was then, I can remember really clearly, actually, just across, so you come out of Miller's at the base of that, what was then a hotel. Walked down around the corner, and we were in an old building that was pretty much derelict.
The parking lot, the ruins. You're not serious. That was the night we met.
That was the night we met. Yeah.
God.
So we knew you were going to be a lawyer.
Wow. Right. Okay. Best not to get into that evening with this being recorded. Holy shit. I didn't realize.
Yeah. There was that night. Yeah, that's how I met you.
Fucking hell. Okay. That's pretty insane. When did you that was an eventful evening.
It was a very eventful evening. It still makes me laugh a great deal.
Well, we'll have to. I think we're quite ready to put that on recording. What happened that night? All right. So you were there in 95. You must have been. Yeah. So 95, 96. How long did you stay?
Oh, geez, I left 98. And then I just had to finish 6 months in Durban on the beachfront for 6 months. Because what happened is, I don't know if you remember, I started with a BSc in animal science, thinking that I wanted to be a vet. And then
I don't remember any of that.
So in fact, I've got a BA that my undergrad courses are things like genetics at second level and microbiology and organic chemistry and all that sort of stuff. So I effectively did my BA in 2.5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I stuffed around a lot in first year, but I didn't really want it enough to do it, and it's a difficult course.
So hang on. So you did BA, what, 96, 97, 98?
Yeah, end of 96, 97, 98, yeah. No, and then I had one more. So it's it's sort of kind of 2.5 years. No, it's 97, 98, half of 99. So okay. I did my BA. So
right. And then what did you do afterwards? Because when we met for the second round, was that 2004?
2004, yeah. What I had by then, so on and off during varsity undergrad, I was doing working as a dive master, and then I went to go and do a little over 6 months in Egypt working as a dive master. Came back,
Right.
getting instructors, and then I spent the December 1990,000. I was working in Mozambique on Inyaka Island. Got chased off by a cyclone. Then I did an HD.
Did you say a cyclone or a psycho?
A cyclone. Although I could tell you a funny story about a cyclone too. I got slapped on the back of the head by a Portuguese chaperone. Yeah, and then I was at Rhodes for 7 months, whatever it takes to do an HDE. And then I lived in Zanzibar and Malawi, Kenya. I hitched up and down pretty much from Kenya down through Malawi. Then 9 months of 2002, I taught high school at Imams Ntosi. And then, which I found really difficult. It was really 36 kids. You understand, we went to private schools. I'd never, and even my teacher training, because I would been to a private school, I did my teacher training at St. Andrews. So I'd seen more than 19 kids in a class. It was a shocker, 38 kids. Language, Imams Ntosi is where KwaMakuta comes in, Chatsworth comes in, and the kind of industrial belt of Durban.
I've been. I used to drive past it, and it used to give me the shudders every time.
The school was right next to that highway just before it goes up.
Yeah, right. I know exactly the one. I used to do that on the way back and forward to the Mantis. I used to go past that all the time. I know exactly that sort of junction, the bridge there as well.
Yeah. So I thought it was really difficult. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, but it was really difficult. And I figured if I had better subject knowledge, it would be easier to teach. So I went back and did an honors in English. That's 2003. Still diving and diving and studying. And then when you came back 2004, the department offered me a master's by research if I taught as well. So I stayed on.
So you were in Maritzburg
You
were in Maritzburg the year before I arrived.
Yeah, I was there for 2.5 years in the end. The second time. I was there 93, 94.
Yeah, the second time.
Yeah, half of 95.
But the second time, no, you mean 2003, 2004,
Excuse me, 2000.
Yeah.
It's not 90.
Yeah, okay.
2000,
I didn't realize that. I thought that basically when my first day, you had also just arrived. You were just starting. I mean, you were starting a new course, but I didn't actually appreciate that you had been there already.
Yeah. I had to go back and do like an honors course, which was a bit weird, I suppose. Well, you went back and did the LLB. It's that same thing. You've been doing other things, your head's in other places, and suddenly you back as kind of almost in an undergrad situation. It's quite weird.
Yeah, I had to do a maths course that made that, and it was a very sort of basic, maths in, I don't know, I can't remember. It was specific to the legal degree. They'd got some basic maths course or whatever, because they had discovered that lawyers going into practice couldn't add 10%. They couldn't add up their billable hours, and the Law Society of South Africa. Yeah, Law Society of South Africa sort of said, you guys might want to fix this. But I mean, I remember being in class with people who I ultimately ended up as a tutor. I mean, maths was never my strong suit, but I remember correcting the teacher. There was some calculation about kilometers to miles, and they'd got it the wrong way around. They'd said 1 mile is equal to 1.6 kilometers, and I sort of said that's not right. And they're like, yeah, but that's what the problem says. So just work out the problem. I was like, but it's wrong. And I remember that just being a source of constant frustration. Let's go to your first song. We're not going to get through all of them. So why don't you tell us what it is while I try and get it up?
Which it is.
Do you remember what it is?
What is first on your list is Norma. It's the Casa Diva, the Maria Callas version. Casa Diva. It's from Bellini's opera Norma. So if you had to lock me on a desert island, I would have to have some opera. So recently I've been listening to a lot more opera. I don't know if you know, but I played the violin for almost all my, from I think when I was about 7 or 8.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so that's actually the Hungarian Rhapsodies has a lot to do with that. But
well, the Hungarian Rhapsody's second, So let's listen to it. Let's have a bite, and I'm just going to start it randomly somewhere in the middle. Let's give it 15, 20 seconds, and then tell me why you picked it.
Excellent.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Right. So
the thing I love about opera, right, is that because and I've listened to opera a long time. First, really begrudgingly in high school when I studied music, and then it grows on you. But what I like about opera is that I don't understand the words usually, and I don't know the story, because I'm so keyed into words and meaning. It shows in English stuff, and I find it very difficult sometimes to just have music. So opera works really well for me because you can get a sense of a piece. You get a sense of the imagery and of the movement and of the pace and that kind of thing without actually the words almost getting in the way. So a lot of the opera I listen to, and this is a really good example actually. Well, actually it's not, because I do happen to know the story and I know where this piece fits in. But a lot of the opera I listen to, I actively don't know that. I make a point of not knowing the words because you almost get your own kind of opera to it. And recently I've started writing a lot of, when I have to write, when I focus, I listen to a lot of opera. This particular piece, I think, so I particularly like arias, the sort of arias. I don't know if you know, an aria is the,
I don't know,
like the
don't know anything about opera.
It's like solos. So think of it as the solos, and I particularly like operatic arias. And this of all the ones I've been listening to recently, this just has some fantastic arias, and this is a particularly famous one, particularly when sung by Maria Callas. And I think it's an old recording, so it gets that kind of texture. But although maybe technically some of the newer stuff is probably better, I just really enjoy the Maria Callas version of it. Yeah. I mean, you nearly got some Wagner there. You nearly got some. You nearly got the Magic Flute, but this is just one I'm particularly enjoying at the moment.
So interesting that about not understanding the languages, because it's one of the things that I find very relaxing about travel. I remember being in Berlin and sitting down at a cafe, and it was busy, and everybody around me was talking. And I felt just so relaxed and at peace and just, almost meditative, because I couldn't understand a word anybody was saying, and my brain wasn't straining to listen. It wasn't processing. It was just this white noise. I know some people listen to white noise before they go to bed and all the rest of it, but it's, there's certainly an element. So, you were born.
So for me,
for me,
it's the connection. In opera, it's that feeling. It's exactly that. But instead of a relaxing white noise, it's a kind of a connection to various emotions and things without me having to process the words part of it and getting hung up on the words part of it.
Yeah.
So
it's exactly very emotive. I mean, I find it brings out emotions in me if I listen to it. But when I've gone to the opera, I've just found it weird. And I haven't really enjoyed it just because the spectacle, I guess it's the visual side of it. And, just I've never really enjoyed drama in the dramatic sense. And, just the overly dramatic, the theater of it. I don't really appreciate it.
I quite like some of it. Some of it I don't. And that's why I don't There's a truly amazing one. I don't even know if I made a recording of it. Was William Kentridge, the artist, the South African artist. He did a kind of a rendition of the Magic Flute that is just incredible.
Okay, yeah, I'll look it up.
Yeah,
interesting. So, childhood. You're born in Ochahazi,
Ochahazi. It's just outside Windhoek. Ochahazi. My old man was a miner. Is a miner. He's still a miner. Actually, he's still
17 kilometers. Wow, it's 17 kilometers north of Windhoek. It mined copper, silver, and small amounts of gold. So
you got.
How long were you there?
2 years, I think. But I'd lived, by the time I was 19, I'd lived in 19 houses, the longest of which was probably 2 or 3 years. So my old man was moved around a lot. So Ochahazi, Amandelbult, Johannesburg, Randfontein, you can see it in the primary schools I went to. I went to Randfontein, Palabora. We were only there, I think I was only at Fauna Park for 6 months. That's actually why I went to boarding school. But yeah, so I grew up in mines, so I'm not really from anywhere. Lots of people say, oh, where are you from, where you grew up? I'm not from anywhere. I'm from whole lots of places. It's quite weird because I don't really have a sense of attachment to a place in childhood.
Yeah. What about your parents? Where are your parents from?
My old man grew up down here in Durban. He went to Glenwood and then joined the mines, and then the mines sent him to Wits. My mother grew up in Johannesburg. She went to Waverley High. My grandfather on my father's side was a miner. My father on my grandfather on my mother's side, the Jewish side, is he was a route setter for Imperial Airways that became BOAC. So they had come down. Second World War my uncle was born in Khartoum. So Second World War in Cairo, then Khartoum and Johannesburg.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So your mom basically got dragged around. I mean, that's quite a challenging lifestyle for a mother of 2 boys, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was actually, and I think she looks back and she gets a bit pissed about it because she kind of, her whole life was kind of subsumed in mining life, because she couldn't have a career and I think when she looks back on it, particularly when both of us were at boarding school, and she was sitting in Gravelot and in Witbank. Gravelot's just outside Palabora, and in Witbank, these are not really my mother's people.
Yeah, I mean, people from Joburg, typically, I mean, it doesn't really have to be said, but you take them, out into the middle of nowhere, and it's a bit like the BVI. There's a lot of people here. They turn to mostly fitness and or booze, one or the other, or both. Do you know what I mean? And it's like tennis. Tennis followed by gin and tonics, basically, for a lot of the ladies. Interesting. So it's just you and you brother. Were you? You went to the same schools. You're close with your brother, aren't you?
No, I'm very close to my brother. Yeah, no, we didn't actually. My brother, we were for the beginning of Rivonia, and then my brother had some substantial learning difficulties, so he went to a school. He was in boarding by the time I think he was in. Where were we in Randfontein when I was probably early 80s. So he did the second part of his primary. So as soon as we moved out of Johannesburg, we couldn't find a school for Craig. So Craig stayed at a boarding school in Johannesburg. Right. And then he went to St. John's. And then so I didn't live with my brother for a very long time. In fact, not until I moved back here 5 years ago did I see my brother regularly.
Wow, I didn't know that. So I mean, he must have gone. So what we're talking about, like age 10 or something like that, like a couple of years before high school?
About that, yeah. Yeah, about that.
Jeez, that's intense.
Not easy, yeah. Very difficult. And I think for us, to go back to very difficult for my mother as well, and my father, but I think particularly for my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an easy life. I mean, I look back on it, I didn't think about it, but in looking back now, that kind of lifestyle is not easy. It's really not. I mean, it's great for a career, and my old man ended up on various big Mining Houses boards and things. He's still on Mining Houses boards. But it's difficult for the rest of the family. There's no question. I mean, I went to boarding school and I probably shouldn't have. You know what I mean? And I went because it was, your choices are St. John's College in Joburg or Frans de Tooi in Palabora.
Yeah.
So what are your choices?
Well, I mean, speaking personally, you should have gone for the Palabora option, but I'm biased. All right, let's go for
followed by Witbank High.
Exactly. Let's go for the second song, and then we'll come back to your early years. So we've got
Franz Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody in number 2, which is actually, are you playing? Okay.
Well, I'm trying to get there. Yeah, go for it.
So I have no idea how I came across this. I came across this when I was really young. I don't know how I got it, but I can remember the tape of it really well. And I used to listen to it just a lot. And it really had such a strong influence on me. I'm not sure if it became before or after my interest in the violin. But again, I think, so there was a big toss up between this and Vivaldi's Four Seasons, because they both kind of play in my head. In childhood, I used to listen to them a lot. It's just a beautiful piece, and it's interesting because I don't like the original piece is actually in piano, and I really don't like the piano version. But I suppose that's what you come to.
That's what I found most. Yeah, well, exactly. You saying you found this on a cassette tape? You had this on a cassette tape? Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know if someone gave it to me because they knew I liked classical music or what it was, but I had a cassette of this for years.
Let's
another
listen.
version of that cassette.
Let's listen. Powerful.
So that is by the original rock star, the first man to sell his soul to the devil to play music. It's one of the it would have been the back pages about Franz Liszt if they had back pages.
Oh, really?
Music. Yeah, he's supposed to have sold his soul to the Crossway Devil, same as Robert Johnson and whoever else. Yeah, it's a piece that features. I just listened to it so much in my childhood, and I know it so well. And so I quite like this. This is the Berliner. I quite like this version.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great piece, and it's one that stayed with me my whole life. And I still listen to it. So I think there are about 19 Hungarian Rhapsodies. They called Hungarian because he didn't want to admit that the music's actually from Romanian gypsies.
Right.
And what's the word I'm looking for? Prejudice runs deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just
Still does.
It's a kind of it's a kind of a classical translation of sort of gypsy theme music in a way.
Interesting. Yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So your childhood, what were you like as a child? Were you shy? Were you naughty? Difficult?
I was naughty, and I think I was probably difficult, but I spent a lot of time by myself, and my happiest memories are actually fishing by myself, playing Lego by myself. My happiest memories are genuinely, and I've got some, so I suppose we all do these very visceral memories of being by myself.
Yeah.
And it's the same for me now. I mean, in effect, so many of the things I enjoy doing now are translations of the things I did as a kid in many ways, and well, fishing certainly. But I was the great fortunes about growing up on mines is, and particularly for the mine manager's son, or the general manager's son, is you get to fish in all the mine dams. Yeah. So, there was always bass somewhere. And in fact, in Randfontein, we lived on a dam. So the bottom of the garden was this massive, it's called Robinson Lake. I think it's been drained because it's radioactive now. But
right.
Gold mining in the 80s, man. Just throw
some big bass. Some big three-eyed bass.
Yeah. I was supposed to be 6'2". But yeah, so I think I was pretty happy, but I think I was difficult. I know other kids probably find me quite difficult. I think people still find me quite difficult. Yeah. But
and
yeah.
Boarding when did you go to boarding school then? You only went at high school, right?
Removed, yes. And 89, standard 6. It was difficult because you can't be alone, particularly in an old, then was still old side, dormitories. You weren't allowed into them before 6 in the evening. And we were bullied really badly. In standard 6, we really were bullied really badly. I suppose you learn to live with it, but I don't know that I ever enjoyed it. This time of the day on a Sunday, it starts now. I still get sort of like a dark anxiousness because it's returning to, and if you speak to a lot of people who are in boarding school, so many of us have, I had a conversation with somebody about it yesterday. And I actually play computer games through it normally. Most Sunday afternoons from sort of 4 to 6, I'll play computer games, which is also a thing I used to do as a kid. I didn't. So boarding school, St. John's, I got like exactly 50-50, enjoyed it, hated it. And actually, not the Tom Waits song, but the Violent Femmes of the Cure. The Violent Femmes album I listened to endlessly when I've got my hands on it. 91, I probably listened to that album more than anything else, particularly because of what it was like. So, you could do a lot of things, and St. John's was very close to a very vibrant. It didn't matter that I played the violin. It didn't matter that I enjoyed rugby and I never played C team. So it's not that kind of school. But then in matric, it got really hard. I got really badly bullied by the guys in my year. So there were only sort of 10 of us in boarding. And they sort of, what would be the word? Ostracized me. So you got to live with these guys and nobody will talk to you day in, day out.
Why?
Which is why the Violent Femmes song. I never really knew why. I've never really understood about it. I never really understood it, but it messed me up badly.
We're starting to have some internet cutting out. Whatever. It's the usual story. It'll either be you or me, obviously. But what?
Probably us because load shedding's just started. I think no. No.
Okay. Anyway, what was the racial makeup of the boarders in your year?
It's probably about. So in my year, there were call it 12 of us who went from removed to matric. And in our group, we had one Chinese guy, Taiwanese. He'd come over to learn English. Poor guy. You talk about rough ways to learn. That. I look back now and I think he must have. Yes, that must have been rough. Let me see. We had. It must be 15, maybe 20%.
Right. Okay.
So, and also, Simon, you've got to think about. I mean, I came off the mines, and schools in that. Never, honestly, never had a social engagement with a black person, ever.
I was going to ask you about that. So, I mean, when you're the son of the mine manager, management is presumably all white or majority white. Labor workforce is all black. I mean, so when did you realize that? When was the first time you realized that black people and white people were treated differently? I mean, you can see that they're doing different jobs, but like, when is the first time you think you realized that there were rules for us and rules for them?
So my parents would often say that it's not, particularly my mother would often say when we were kids, this isn't right, but you don't really get it. And then when I was at Randfontein, actually, geography, I can still remember it was geography class. I had homework. My mother lost the plot they taught us, and I can still remember it really well. I can kind of see how this thing worked, but they taught us in geography that things would plan with that because white people were very clever and can do all these things, so they could be managers or doctors or whatever. Indian people were good with money, so they could only be shop teachers, and then colored people and then black people couldn't be taught anything, so they could only dig holes. Wow. And that's why and all things. And I brought the stuff home, and my mother lost the plot and dragged me and my homework off to the headmaster. And so they're there, but then also, the thing is, mining in South Africa, then, I mean, it's sort of apartheid's cutting edge, there's no question about it, but it was also hugely class structured. So, I mean, in Gravelot, we actually lived at the top of the hill. So if you talk about being on the top of the pyramid, the manager's house was on top of the hill. And then as you went down, and
the traditional hierarchy.
Crazy. But I mean, like in Palabora, we had 7 people working in the house. We had another typically apartheid thing, and even in all the houses, Rustenburg, Randfontein, Witbank, we had houseboys. Usually Mozambicans. We had chefs, we had the whole trip, because there's this really weird old colonial, kind of thing, highly stratified, just really, I mean, as a kid, look, it's difficult in a way because, I mean, geez, I grew up in a house where I had everything I wanted with seven servants, and I use the term specifically there. I could fish wherever I wanted. I could do whatever I wanted. I had whatever I wanted.
You were claim boss.
Exactly. It's a funny thing because you're caught between this realization of how evil the system that allows you to, and not in the kind of the new woke sense, but the evil privileges that gives you, and yet it's your childhood, and in some cases there's great nostalgia to it. So I can listen to that Hungarian Rhapsody. I can picture it in particularly in Palabora, in really hot days, and the house was cool and dark, and I can remember listening to it there. So you're kind of caught between this, not wanting to, I don't know if you ever find this sort of thing, but you're almost caught between having to acknowledge what that is. And a lot of what I did in my PhD was exactly about this kind of figuring out what does it mean to be a person who grew up like I grew up, where I grew up. And yet it's your childhood, and you're nostalgic about your childhood, and there were things you loved about your childhood. So I find it a very difficult, difficult exercise, not exercise, but particularly, if you talk to Black South Africans, you talk to Black friends, and you talk about your childhood and what it must sound like. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My upbringing was slightly different. So I grew up in Joburg. I've always been around in Joburg. I don't think it was as obvious, the sort of the division between black and white. I'm not sure it was as obvious in Johannesburg, because
no, it wasn't.
To me also, because I went to multiracial school from day one. So for me, the first memory of what's going on here was inviting a black kid from my class to come to my birthday party on a Saturday and being told he couldn't come, and me thinking, what fuck's that all about? And then I remember my dad being on the phone to this boy's father, and then he pitched up at my birthday party on Saturday, and I never asked my dad about it, but they basically came up with a plan to get him into the suburbs. But I think that was it. I was obviously aware of apartheid. I think the next thing was when I was sort of walking to the shops, and I saw 2 cops harassing this worker outside the shop, and I just thought, I've never seen that before, full stop.
Yeah.
And now, obviously the reason I hadn't seen it before is because they didn't do that to white people. And so that was a shock. But it's weird how, you know, it kind of seeps in. And yeah, I mean, I'm nostalgic about my childhood too. I'm nostalgic about South Africa. I mean, well, here's a question. It's been 10 years since I've been back in SA. If I was to visit now, yeah, I mean, time flies. So the last time I was back in SA was for my dad's funeral. My son was a few months old, 6 months old.
Still in a push car,
Yeah. So what do you think pram, push car, whatever. What would I find most surprising, shocking, unsettling to come back now?
The state of Johannesburg to start with.
What about it?
Oh, potholes, the dirt, it's just bad. The last 2 years, really. I mean, you understand how systems unravel. And systemic disintegration accelerates exponentially. And we're hitting the stage now. I mean, Maritzburg, I first saw it about 4 years ago. And now Maritzburg is an absolute tip. You would probably, if you ever went through Mthatha in the 90s or the early 2000s, that's pretty much parts of Maritzburg now.
I remember.
Johannesburg is just hitting that now.
Yeah. There's a phrase from a song. Whenever I was driving through Mthatha, there's a band called the Tragically Hip, the Canadian band, and there's a lyric in the song. I can't remember which one, but it's the lyric is "Whispers of disease and garbage bag trees." And whenever I used to drive through Mthatha, I always used to think of the garbage bag trees because they were literally pick and pay packets. Stuck in, it's almost like fruit in a tree, all these shopping bags everywhere. Okay, so
so it's not, look, I mean, Joburg's not quite that bad. I mean, the south and some of the east, the west is, but it's the general disintegration. And the other thing I think you would notice is the mood. It's pretty, I think many South Africans, myself included, are pretty tired. It's been a long 10 years. It's been a tough 10 years. I mean, you probably, if you think of, I mean, in my case, I've had my business for 12 years now. Every single year, the economy has got worse. So I've literally been trying to grow a business for 12 years in an ever declining economic and policy situation. I think, you know, it's things like load shedding, you know, at the moment. So our house is on, we don't notice it anymore. But really, if you can't afford that or don't have that, today we would have been out 8 to 10. We go out again. So in level 4, we go out again 4 to 6, and then we go out again at 10 to 12. But in the stages we've just been through, some houses, some areas are off for 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not normal.
No, it's not. So I was reading Financial Times a couple of weeks ago, and I came across this article. I'm going to read some of it to you. So it's about Eskom. So Financial Times, as this to say, says Andre de Ruyter, the head of South Africa's power monopoly, illustrated the high level of criminal theft in the country's energy supply by explaining how organized gangs would swap out truckloads of coal for delivery and replace them with low-grade rocks. An apparent attempt last month to assassinate de Ruyter, the head of Eskom, whose drink was allegedly spiked with cyanide, brought home the huge challenges he has faced in rooting out such corruption. The apparent poisoning revealed this week, which took place the same day in December that de Ruyter resigned from Eskom under political pressure, showed the strength and reach of what experts say are cartels operating within South Africa's most important state assets. A couple more paragraphs. Intimidation at Eskom, where people briefed on investigations said that whistleblowers fear to come forward, and in particular, the alleged hit on de Ruyter reflect another worrying trend in South African society, the rise of assassination attempts to stop corruption probes. That's some serious shit, man. What the fuck?
Heavy. It's heavy. So that's basically, you know, I've got a call after this. and it's specifically on a briefing for the based fund managers on this kind of thing. So the level of political violence in South Africa is incredible. I mean, in KZN now, I think we're probably up to about 1 or 2 assassinations, political assassinations a month. I mean, KZN is a violent place. It always has been, but it's exceptionally violent. So if you imagine, I don't know how much systems theory you work with, but it's the easiest way to explain this sort of thing, right? So they're built on paradigms, right? The thing that underpins it. So business, the paradigm is to make money or to, so you build a system that enables you to extract money from whatever. States ideally are built, the system that creates the state is built on, what's best for individuals. For citizens. Right?
For society.
And that's for society, and how best to grow it, how best to sort it, and obviously the ideological factors, blah blah blah, all of that. And that's what we had under Mbeki, Ramaphosa. I mean, Mandela and Mbeki, and then Zuma actively changed that. And like the guy's superpower was to be able to look at a system, and pick out exactly how to warp it so that you fundamentally change the paradigm that the system was built on, to move from a system that worked for the collective to one that worked for a few connected. And so that's grand state capture, and really, and the way he did that is either you put your own people, corrupt people in key positions, or you put incompetent people in key positions, because then the system can't work. And it does two things: one, you can redirect funds, and two, you can avoid accountability, right? So that's at a grand level, and he did this to all the SOEs. Eskom being the biggest one that he did this to. So what's happened since Ramaphosa came in is I don't know if you know the term when cancer spreads throughout the body. I'm about to use the term and I can't remember what it is.
Metastasizes.
That thing. Yeah. So that's what's happened. So it's no longer grand corruption. It's not, various cartel-like things operate in various areas, and that's basically what happened with they wanted to call it a popular uprising, but really it was cartels protecting their assets in KZN municipalities. The violence and uprising, violence in July. So it's bad. I mean. It's starting to get a bit hairy, particularly
there's a documentary on Netflix about the war in Afghanistan. I can't remember what it's called. It's really good. It's a 5-part series. It starts with 9/11, then America's reaction to it.
I think I've seen it. Yes, I think I've seen it.
The Patriot Act, and then
yes.
And then the war in Afghanistan. And they do a freedom of information request. They find out that some of the generals have been speaking to, I don't know, the CIA or something. It was a non-classified interview where the generals were talking. And one of the generals talks about precisely that, about cancer, how if there is bribery and corruption, sort of in an institution like university, you can, his analogy was that's skin cancer. There's a couple of individuals, you can cut it out and the rest of the body, repair, you can go on. But when it gets up to the high government level, when it works its way all the way up to the top, his analogy was, that's brain cancer, and the only thing you can do then is cut the fucking head off, and the society will die.
Yeah, it's in the same way. It's systemic. There's the kind of the extreme of that is what in the Congolese they call the avantage system, and it comes out of because Leopold originally Congo wasn't owned by Belgium; it was owned by Leopold himself. So literally the largest land the world has ever seen. And he had no funds, so he would send out Belgian people and he would give them this is your area, and here's your title. You're the governor of Hot Katanga, whatever it is, and I can't pay you, or I can pay you very little. So your job is to take advantage of what you can make here, and that carries on today. The sensitive advantage. So the police in Lubumbashi, for instance, are not paid. I think
it's carrying on now in the Congo. It's happening with the cobalt mines.
Yeah. So your beat policeman in Lubumbashi earns about $50 last time I was up there, and he gets 6 blocks, and that's his. And I mean, you drive past him, and you give him your money. You couple of francs every day, every month. I know guys that do a standard meeting last Thursday of every month, and that's how it works. So that's one way it works. What we've got here is slightly different because the system itself still has governance aspects to it. So it's not completely, but it's literally. I mean, a lot of people being very dramatic about it, and everyone's talking about inflections and tipping points and blah blah blah, but really there's not a lot of time to turn it around because the system itself is not. I don't know what the cancer term would be, but I would think severe treatment would still save it, but it would take extreme action, and what we're not seeing is meaningful.
So it's stage 3 or 4. It's Okay, listen, let's come back to this because it's really interesting. But we've got to get through some of your tracks. Let's go. Whether you want to introduce your next one.
So I could just jump. Look, the Tom Waits isn't tied to a particular time. It's just a fantastic bit of music, and also, as you know, I have a deep love of bars. Bars of all kinds. Bars are a fascinating place.
And this is literally him sitting at a bar, drinking whiskey.
And haven't you ever had this when you look across the room and you can imagine yourself with a person on the other side? And it's an incredibly evocative song.
Well, I hope that I don't fall in love with you.
Bars.
Falling in love just makes me blue. Well, the music plays and you display your heart for me to see. I had a beer and now I hear you calling out for me. And I hope that I don't fall in love with you.
Beautiful. He's so talented.
It's awesome, man. But it's just that. I mean, it's an incredibly. I mean, you've sat in bars all over the world. You know that feeling, and you sit there. And
I do.
And you see someone, and you have this whole imagination in their head, and then they get up and walk away, and you realize
exactly.
I just love
it's a whole.
Just,
yeah. Great tune. So South Africa. The corruption. What do you think? I don't want to. Let's talk about let's go back. 1995 Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I was always troubled by this. So what did you say?
I say what a magic time, the 90s, well, you would know as well. For us, not for maybe other people, but yeah.
It was. I was always troubled by the TRC, and I think about it, I suppose, in terms of from the legal perspective, because you've got a religious leader, Desmond Tutu, basically tasked with discovering the horrors of the apartheid era and granting amnesty to those who confess their sins. And I mean, I think it was back in the day, they used to call it the Kleenex committee, right? Because it was just a lot of tears. I mean, highly emotional. And I've seen the TRC reports are massive. I mean, you can stack them up to the roof. But for me, this was the start of a new country. We've got to move forward. There's the sort of the carrot, come forward and we won't prosecute you. And then there's the stick of, if you don't come forward, we will prosecute you, and somebody might rat on you because, so it was basically a panic. It was it put people in a position where they, you know, had to choose, do they come clean? And of course, coming clean is a relative term, because I don't think anybody thinks that, you know, some of these guys really did come clean, but still, it was, I think I've seen it being referred to as sort of a philosophical approach to justice. But did it, in your view, like, given where we are now and in retrospect, was that a mistake? Because to me, justice does have an element of retribution. You set the tone, you say, because these people, the people that came to the TRC, literally got away with murder, right? I can see the argument that, you know, it's better that they came forward and got away with it than people never found out what happened to their family. But also, there was, in my view, no justice. And did that not set the tone for what ultimately became a fairly lawless society? The start of the new country, people are seeing people get away, the worst of the worst, get away with horrific stuff.
So yeah, look, I'll give you the lawyer answers to this, yes and no. No. So actually, the problem is not the TRC. The catharsis involved in the TRC is fundamentally a product of its moment. So you've got to understand that the 90s as a global moment distill themselves in really interesting ways in what happens in South Africa. And part of that is a new sense of how to confront terror, what we now would think of as terror, how we now confront authoritarianism. And the view would be that you hold it up against something like Nuremberg trials, you know, but what you get in there is you get, you know, it's retribution, and it's retribution writ large, which is not possible in South Africa. And one of the reasons is basically big business says to the ANC, look, if you do this, we'll leave. So that's your first thing.
If you do this being, if you do this being the Nuremberg style, you put Eugene de Kock on trial and you hang him.
If there is large-scale retribution, whether it's been taking the land, taking the lions, if it's nationalization or any kind of retribution, we will leave. They did anyway. I mean, Anglo's was on the London Stock Exchange very, very quickly. So there was that. But so there's that component to it as well. But it's also bound up in the conception of what South Africa could be. You know, and you can see it. You can see it in the language of the Constitution, in that everything that the Constitution is what apartheid was not.
Yeah.
So they speak directly to each other, and part of that process is that the apartheid process would have been a vindictive one, and the ANC at the time was perceived to have the moral high ground. And so, as one having the moral high ground, the aim is then to be conciliatory. So in a sense, it was an act of power rather than an act of weakness. The TRC, I think, was incredibly important. And I've read a lot. The chapter in South Africa in my PhD is about exactly victims and perpetrators in South Africa's wars. And a lot of this is dealing with this idea of what do you do with both perpetrators of violence from both sides. Because the other problem is the ANC and you know, there were acts of violence on both sides. So what the TRC seeks to do is it seeks to say, right, you know, all violence is bad. All atrocities committed are bad. But we need to talk about them. We need to move beyond them. The mistake from the TRC, though, and there are still problems with it, is that there was never strong trials on the back of it. So even those who did not, were not given amnesty or were not, you know, forgiven in the kind of South African way, have never been tried. So we've never had, you know, but PW never had to talk about what he really knew. He was never forced to tell the truth. And
from a
that's because
legal
both
perspective, there's another element to that, which is trials. Criminal trials are one thing, but civil trials, the result of a civil trial is that damages are awarded to the claimant, the plaintiff. Now, damages, who do you sue? You sue the state. If the police have taken your breadwinner away, you sue the state. So it's effectively the ANC that has to pay damages. So it's the state. And so
the state at that stage can't pay. So that's the problem. And this goes, so if there is a link between, because remember, after this, South Africa becomes less lawless. The murder rates, we would never think it when you could pass out at the Shell on Commercial Avenue, sleep soundly through the night, through the rest of your Thursday night and stagger back to res. The murder rates in South Africa was much higher than it is now then, much, much higher. In Edendale particularly, they just had the 6-day war. So South Africa does become less lawless. The murder rate declines, all of these things happen. But a key component of what happens with that feeds then into where we are now, and that there's no accountability, and it's public accountability. Those who were really, really, really the architects of grand apartheid got to retire in wilderness and die happily in their sleep. All of these kind of things. And that feeds into the sense now of a lack of accountability. And in fact, I would argue that at the roots of so much of the ANC's corruption goes back to a similar mindset, and it goes back to Rand. But Mandela forgave and he didn't punish. And then, this sense of, and not just her, I mean, she just as a figurehead of it, but there was never, as a result, it was always, oh, well, the collective will forgive. And then there's no personal accountability. And as soon as there's no personal accountability, doesn't it? We've got phenomenal laws, amazing policies, all of that. It's never implemented, never overseen, because fundamentally there is no accountability. And I think if you trace a key aspect of the TRC, it's that sense of accountability. And I would agree with you, actually. I hadn't thought about it so much in terms of the reparations as well.
Yeah, I mean, reparations were supposed to be part of it, but I'm not aware of there ever being a reparations fund. Was there? Do you know?
In some cases, some reparations were made to families, specifically. Right. But the whole idea of, say, that the reconstruction and development in the sort of policy sense, that was supposed to be reparations. This is building houses for people, services for people, that kind of thing. So in that sense, the original, the foundational ideas of South Africa as a developmental state did really well until the ANC basically turns in on itself. The ANC itself is a, as a the problem with the ANC is this, right? Is that the ANC is built out of everyone gets behind the same cause to fight apartheid. So in that, you've got capitalists, you've got really hardcore left kind of radicals, you've got union guys, you've got all of these guys. And the moment apartheid's gone, now your fractures start. So the higher ideals of ideology, that maybe brought somebody like Mandela versus I just want to use this as a vehicle to get rich of somebody, say, like Zuma. Those become in tension. Those tensions start creating. And really the whole thing dissipates. But it's been together for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's inertia. It's kind of organizational inertia is long. And really what you've been seeing in South Africa for the last 5 years is the death of the ANC. It'll continue. I mean, it's not like, it's gone tomorrow. It'll continue in a form for a very long time, and it'll always be a major party. But really, you're seeing the death of the ANC, the moral, societal leader. That's gone. That's been gone for 10 years or more. You actually have a great image for it. It's that moment where you talk about them carrying Jacob Zuma on their shoulders around Durban when the pilot was.
That was the day I decided to leave. It was So I was on the 8th floor in town in Durban, and Zuma had just been acquitted of his rape charge in Maritzburg at Maritzburg High Court.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
And then he drove straight into Durban and did a victory lap around Durban CBD. And I parked in a garage that was a block away, and there was no way I could get to, nor would I have tried to get from my office to my car. Had I got to my car, there's no way I could drive it because the streets were absolutely packed. And then the blue light brigade came, and people came out in thousands. And I was just sitting on the 8th floor looking down, and they were chanting and cheering because, he had been acquitted, and that meant that he was going to be the next leader of the ANC. And I just thought, I'm not sure this is a society that I can really be part of or wants me to be a part of it. And I think it was at that coupled with some pretty violent crimes happening in Durban around that time, restaurants being shot up, with AK-47s, and having an English partner who just didn't understand a lot of the nuances, wasn't comfortable, and nor was I.
Yeah,
and that was the thing. It was one thing when I was in my 20s and I was walking around Joburg with half a packet of Stuyvesant Blue and chapstick and $20 in my pocket. And it's another thing when you meet somebody that and you fall in love and you start thinking about career and family. Totally different perspectives. Let's go to another song. Come back to this. So the next one is your it's an absolute stonker.
Boarding school, man. Boarding school. So this and the next song of that 50-50 thing about boarding school.
So,
and
this is an absolute classic. This was also varsity for me. This was early 90s.
There's no album I've listened to more than this. I listened to this back to back from 91 till 94, just all the time. It could have been many songs off this album, but this is
an absolute classic. So I'm going to start this about halfway, and then I'm going to let it run. Hang on, let's. There we go.
I take one, cause you left me, and two for my family, and three for my heartache, and four for my headaches, and five for my lonely, and six for my sorrow, and seven for no tomorrow, and eight, I forget what 8 was for, but nine for lost God, 10 for everything. Or you can all just kiss off into the air. Behind my back I can see them stare. They'll hurt me bad, but I won't mind. They'll hurt me bad, they do it all the time. Yeah, they do it all the time. Yeah, they do it all the time. Do it all the time. Do it all the time.
What a classic, man. Jeez.
Yeah. So it's pretty clear why somebody who was in the position I was in boarding school would appeal to them. But there's also, dance floors in Whitehorse, and just going off to that kind of thing, or the Doors, or all of these places. Because if you remember that kind of moment, that kind of scene. So for me, it has those two sides. But then the other, and this is linked to that next song, and this is what I was saying about, boarding school, there was both, or school was like a dead 50-50. Absolutely hated, absolutely loved it. Because the other part of it is at the same time, that that post-apartheid moment of extreme freedom, and it was amazing, man.
Yeah.
You know, this next song is so The Cure, Just Like Heaven, is for me the flip side of this. I mean, this is really good gothic, you know, gothic girls in Dr. Martens and G-strings, and that's all at Alcatraz. I mean, man, my mind.
Let's listen to it.
Year-old mind.
Let's listen to that one as well, then, and then we can carry on chatting, because this is an absolute stonker as well.
Yeah, because they kind of, to me, in my head, they talk to each other, both about a moment, but also about a mindset.
Yeah, Just Like Heaven.
Oh, sexiest woman I've ever seen in my life. It sits in my head.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
That's also one of my favorite songs in a line. Show me how you do it, and I promise I'll run away with you.
Yeah, it is absolute classic.
Yeah, so it's just, you know what I mean? Sort of 16, 17, 18, getting into clubs, both angry and kind of messed up, but also just
letting go.
I mean, that particular song will always remind me of, as I said to you, they had this, the less you wear, the less you pay to get in party sometimes at Alcatraz. I don't know if you ever went to Alcatraz.
I did.
And
I don't know if I went to the less you wear, less you pay parties, but yeah.
Yeah, 17-year-old me with my eyes. And there was a woman, I mean, she was, I suppose, probably in her 20s, but like just there she was dancing to the song, and I was like, oh, yeah. She was literally wearing a G-string and a pair of Dr. Martens. Mine gone. Yeah. So it's both of those things, you know what I mean? It's the kind of, you know, they're both, it's a great time. It's also, it was really, but also a really, really amazing time to be alive in the 90s in South Africa, the late 90s, middle to late 90s in South Africa.
Yeah.
It was an amazing time. The festival.
Yeah, we had a jewel, man, and it felt like there were no rules. I mean, I just did whatever the fuck I wanted all the time,
exactly.
And I had no fear really at all, and you know, it just felt like no one was watching, nobody cared, you know, like going like Rustler's Valley and those clubs and stuff, like 206 Louis Burta, you know, the Doors,
in Durban.
330s. I mean, it just
there's a,
you know,
by the way, there's a 330s get together on the 18th in Durban.
Oh, is there really?
March. Yeah. Bunch of 50-year-olds, man. Same DJs.
I mean,
but it really is. I mean, it's so in so many ways. And the other thing about it is, and I was talking, my nephew's 20, and talking about his views on the world that he's growing up in, and everything's getting worse in his view.
Yeah.
We were growing up in a world where everything was getting better. And everything was fantastic. We were all friends, you know.
Or at least we thought it was. We thought it was.
I mean,
we had an idea.
Ended.
Yeah, we had an idea that there was promise and hope, and that we were going to be part of something new and something special. So we touched on this a while ago. Well, a short while ago. The riots in SA. So that, I mean, there was the I'm not so interested. Well, I'm interested in the socio-political aspects, but more sort of how it affected you. I mean, in a nutshell, as I understood it, there was some kind of call to action arising from Jacob Zuma's incarceration, but ultimately the commentators at the time were saying this is really about poverty, unemployment, inequality. So firstly, get to the politics in a minute, but how shocked were you? Like, how did you feel? I mean, was it surprising and shocking? Did you watch that thinking, holy fuck?
Hear that.
Yeah.
You could, I mean, we couldn't leave the house. You couldn't leave the neighborhood. It's scary. It's genuinely scary. I've been locked. I've been in, was it 2001 in Zanzibar when there was a uprising and they decapitated a whole lot of policemen and all sorts of stuff. And just before it happened, the guys from the shop said, look, guys, just stay in the dive shop compound. We'll make sure nobody bothers you. This doesn't involve you. Just step out of it. You know what I mean? I think they dropped off some power and some other stuff. And, here's a couple of cases of beer. Do what you you guys normally do. And there's all this bangs and stuff going on. And it kind of bothered me. It didn't really, I wasn't, I had $500 in my pocket. You can get in many places in Africa with $500, or you could then. And then again in the Congo, I knew eventually there would be helicopters if they weren't. It's a fundamentally, because then you could leave and go home, to a place of safety. It's a fundamentally different thing when
you are
happens
home.
And it is your home. So there's that. I mean, you suddenly start thinking about things like now you live in a world where we've got 2,500 liters of backed up water. I've got 4 redundancy systems for electricity. I always keep 40 liters of petrol in the house, multiple gas refills, that kind of shit. So you mock preppers and stuff, and then you realize that you're going down a road of always making sure you've got. So we make sure we've got 1 month of dog food in the house at all times, because obviously, because so it really changed my sense of what a society can be, and I keep mentioning this, but I mean, I specifically wrote parts of my PhD. My PhD is in war and instability in Southern Africa, post 1960. I mean, I studied this stuff, but it was all supposed to be finished in my head, and yet here it is. So it's that, and I mean, all of a sudden, I'm phoning the same guys. I'm talking to the same guys that I talked to in the Congo for security about the possibilities of chopper pickups. And, they're saying things like, look, what does your property look like? So if they come to your gate, we live on we've got a forest and a thing. He said, if they come to your gate, they're going to loot your house. So go outside of go to the bottom of your property where the monkeys and the ticks and the bushbuck are, and wait there, because they're not looking for you. They're looking for what's in your house. So it's that kind of thing. And suddenly I was like, oh, shit, man. I can't believe this is where my head is now. And in a way that never leaves. And I've become, I'm not anxious, but I find it incredibly difficult, even when I go to countries I know I'm quite safe. I find it very difficult to relax. Like, you constantly see the cracks in society. Because fundamentally what's happening in many ways in South Africa is the South African state is fraying. The ability of the state to exert itself, to literally force its will, has deteriorated massively. I mean, there are areas where the state no longer exists in South Africa, which then is part of what happened. So, I mean, it really changes how you understand societies and how they work. I mean, the researcher in me, the person who talks about this stuff all day, I mean, this is what I consult on, was fascinating. It was amazing, but that was the same as my brain in the Congo when I saw it happen. And now suddenly I'm out on my balcony and you can hear it coming up the valley. And it's a very, my parents are in the area, and Craig's out on a farm in a rural area. It's very different. It's a very different. On the other hand, though, it's also very interesting to watch what the community did. So I live in I don't know if you remember Hilton much, but so it's very white, very waspy, and very, no question. So the first thing was put up barricades, keep everybody out. Oof. You know what I mean? I mean, there were guys that were reading their army days. They were loving it. I can't believe how many guns we have in our neighborhood. Every man in his Ford Ranger and his 16 hunting rifles was staggering around at roadblocks and stuff. But then one really interesting thing happened. Sort of I don't know how many international people would hear this, but the kind of the township area nearest us is an area called Sweetwaters, and most of the staff, domestic workers, that kind of thing, that service Hilton live in Sweetwaters. And the initial reaction was to lock Sweetwaters out. And then Hilton realized that actually we don't function without. And eventually we had this weird mix. So effectively Sweetwaters and Hilton encircled themselves with a mix of racists with shotguns and Ford Rangers and taxi drivers.
Yeah.
So we had one of the only unlooted shopping centers for quite a way around. And the taxi drivers pulled in and protected it, because that's the only suppliers that the two communities had. So, and it's that other things you learn. Suddenly you start learning about, like, you can't just go and buy petrol.
Yeah.
You can't just go and get, suddenly you look at your cupboard that you always look at and you think, shit, that's what we've got. We don't know how long this is going to take. So it's, your mindset changes. It's in quite a fundamental way. I suppose people who live in earthquake areas understand it. Like you have
I do this. We do this every August. So we start prepping. We have a list. So medical aid kit. You got to go through your medical aid kit. Make sure that everything, nothing's expired. And then it's the sandbags, and then it's the food, the pet food, the water, the generator, the diesel, the petrol, the cash. Because when we left after Hurricane Irma, there were all these it was traffic jams, and we were like, it was fuel being pumped by hand. So somebody had pulled an old water pump out and had dropped it into the tank and was pumping out by hand into containers, selling it by containers. And you can't go get money, you can't go get cash. And I think, for me, it was interesting as well how quickly society breaks down, and also how, because this is, this is a pretty calm, non-violent society I live in, but when people are put under pressure and this mob mentality takes over,
it's nasty.
It's wildfire how quickly it takes over, and there's a certain element of it's almost like you see the same sort of thing at raves and in mosh pits. People just lose their mind. They just get carried away. Religious fervor, in these, American churches or whatever, people speaking in tongues or whatever. You can see it when people are looting as well. Their eyes are all glazed over. It's just
it's grab.
Pure excitement. So thrilling to be able to, walk into a shop and just take what you want. It's absolutely, thrilling stuff. So
I've had two. So I've got airlifted out of Mozambique once on a cyclone. That big one that was in January 2000. And I've been, in fact, Prue and I were in a Mozambique, and it's interesting. So the difference there is that there is nothing to loot. So it's a very different experience. So that kind of prepping and the kind of prepping for social instability I found. But it's interesting. I hadn't that crossover. So I have never seen the natural thing crossover into civil unrest, because the places I was in Mozambique, everything was flat. There was nothing to loot. There wasn't a hell of a lot before it came. But I suppose in developed societies, I could see it happening.
You see, there was a lot of backlash. You were seeing people walking out of, department stores carrying, televisions on their back, flat screen TVs. And, I had people say, this is disgraceful. This is just theft, stealing televisions. And I was like, I totally get it now. Like that's not a TV. That's an item which can be bartered for something else that you need. And, I had to go and loot my neighbor's property because, I didn't have to, but Saskia basically said, go and we'd taken in a dog, and we knew it had come from our neighbor's property, and our neighbor wasn't there. So she told me, go and find dog food in his house and come back with whatever else you can find,
Yeah.
And his doors and windows had been blown out. And I basically walked into his house unannounced, found the dog food, and then started pulling, tins of fucking ravioli and stuff and sticking them into a backpack. And I found that incredibly emotionally upsetting, that I'd walked into somebody's house uninvited and were opening cupboards and was taking stuff out of there. And Sassy, of course, said to me, if it had been the other way around, you would have absolutely allowed our neighbors to come and take whatever. And I was like, yes, but it doesn't get over the fact that I can't ask, I haven't asked, and I just walked in unannounced and took their stuff.
Yeah. So that's the thing is and then that you put your finger on, I think, something that's so difficult about all of this is it makes you consider aspects of humanness and being an individual in societies that you don't normally have to consider. And one of the difficult things about being in South Africa at the moment is that there's just all the time. You know what I mean? It just doesn't stop. For example, I've read a lot about complicity, state complicity in war and those kind of things. In a moral sense, South Africans, myself included, are now complicit in support for the war in Ukraine because we're busy doing, so it doesn't stop. It's from really high moral issues about complicity and support of governments and geopolitics to issues about how does it feel to not be starving in a country where there's so much inequality, and you're seeing it so much more now. So that's so you put your finger on it's just that constant that I think you asked what would you notice about South Africa and coming back. It's that constantly having to confront difficult things about the nature of society, your place in it, your past. What does it mean to be, to have had all the advantages of white South African growing up? How does that cost me now that in employment terms and those kind of things? It's just so tiring.
Let's talk about war a little bit. I'm going to read you something. I've got a couple of things to read you. So first one is this. The arrival of the violence that marks Mozambique's civil war in his village prompts Kinzu, a character in Miyakuto's Sleepwalking Land, to write in his notebook that war is a snake that bites us with our own teeth. Kinzu's observation is intriguing as it raises a number of important issues relating to the experience of war by those forced to live through its terrors. Without doubt, the image of a snake indicates that the war will poison and destroy its victims. This position is immediately complicated, however, through the implication that war blurs the lines between victim and perpetrator. If indeed war bites us with our own teeth, then those who choose to start wars will ultimately also suffer its destruction, and those who initially suffer due to war will become the perpetrators thereof. Now, I find that statement very insightful, but ultimately quite depressing. Who wrote that?
Yeah, that's the opening lines of my PhD, actually. That's the opening paragraphs of my PhD. I don't think I've ever heard it read out like that, actually. It's profoundly depressing, and that Miyakuta is an incredible man. By the weirdest chances, actually, when I was on Inyaka, he was the head of the biological station that's also on the island, and I used to walk past him. I was snogging a Portuguese master's student that was doing dissertation work there, and he would walk in the mornings. The hotel was here with like his house behind it, and the biology station here, and I'd spend the night with her, and we'd cross each other on the beach. But I didn't know who the guy was until 4 years later, and writing about his books in my PhD. But it is a profoundly, and we see it time and again, and we're seeing it time and again. You can't, and this is this question about complicity. And it goes, so I said to you earlier, you know, I wrote so much of my PhD, I wrote about trying to understand what it means to be, you know, a white South African me in the world I'd grown up in a sense, and kind of war is a very sharp focus of that. And the reason I chose war is because everywhere I went, everywhere I've been, when I was working in Mozambique, you know, Juma was Frelimo and what was his name? Anyway, you know, the guys in Malawi that I worked with in Malawi had rode guns and supplies across to Renamo. And, you know, the guys that owned the dive shops I worked in had all been recce's or had been, you know, so it's just everywhere I went, somebody had, in Southern Africa, every place I worked, everybody had a war story. And fundamentally, the war story is always the same. Not about, and I don't mean the same in that, you know, everyone paints themselves as a hero. I don't. It's the stories. It doesn't matter who was telling the story. If they fought in, you know, for, you know, Cubans I spoke to that had fought for, you know, in Angola, or just the stories were always the same. And they're always stories about people. They're always stories about suffering. They're always stories about exhilaration. They're always all these, and it didn't matter who you were fighting for, what color you were, what it was, and it just really. Well,
that's
particularly interested in that.
It's a very interesting point. So the second thing I want to read to you is an article by Jeffrey Gethelman, who is the East Africa bureau chief for the New York Times. Okay. So he writes this. There is a very simple reason why some of Africa's bloodiest, most brutal wars never seem to end. They are not really wars. Not in the traditional sense, at least. The combatants don't have much of an ideology. They don't have clear goals. They couldn't care less about taking over capitals or major cities. In fact, they prefer the deep bush where it is far easier to commit crimes. Today's rebels seem especially uninterested in winning converts, content instead to steal other people's children, stick Kalashnikovs or axes in their hands, and make them do the killing. Look closely at some of the continent's most intractable conflicts, from the rebel-laden creeks of the Niger Delta to the inferno in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and this is what you will find. What we are seeing is the decline of the classic African liberation movement and the proliferation of something else, something wilder, messier, more violent, and harder to wrap our heads around. If you'd like to call this war, fine, but what is spreading across Africa like a viral pandemic is actually just opportunistic, heavily armed banditry. What do you think about that?
Oof. Yes and no. I disagree profoundly with some of it. I find, and the tone particularly, I find deeply, deeply unpleasant. It's very much our man in Africa reporting to the civilized about what the savages are up to. So in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no, because he also has this kind of epoch understanding of history, which, you know, the liberation epoch was there was good versus bad and wrong versus right, and there's none of that anymore. So you can only call it war if there's righteousness and ideology, which is bullshit. So yes and no, I agree with some of what he has to say. But no, because I mean, Ethiopia is fundamentally the war that's ongoing. The world seems to think it's over. It really isn't. I mean, that's basically about wiping out an ethnicity. You know, that's probably one of the oldest reasons for war ever. I mean, sure, you can break it down to once we've wiped them out, we get to take their land and their women and their tanks. But you know, so what the kind of thing he's talking about is what is in, I suppose, East and Central Africa. So border of Uganda, Congo, up into thing, and really, yes, in that sense, it's the state no longer exists, and what is in its place are heavily armed gangs. In the same way as in exactly the same way as on the Cape Flats in South Africa, the state no longer exists, and what they are gangs. You know, and if you want your road paved, you go and talk to the head gangster. If you need money for school, you know, and in return you ensure that the state never gets a foothold in the place. So there's that, yes, but it's not a. So it has it has some utility. Thinking about it that way has some utility in various aspects. I very, very, very strongly disagree with his reference to the Niger Delta. I think if anything, that's about extremely poor people trying to stop Western companies looting and poisoning their environment. I think that is a gross what's the word I'm looking for? Misrepresentation of what's going on there. Sure, there's criminality and all of this. War is a fundamentally criminal activity. It's the strongest wins. It's the very worst of what we are.
I mean, it's a good point that people don't often think about. You know, people think of war as being righteous. I mean, just look at the narrative, you know, the Ukraine-Russian war. I mean, you know, I've done some work with Russians and Ukrainians. You know, there's you know, I mean, they're neighbors, they're cousins. There's a lot of similarities between their outlook and you know,
the oligarchs.
And you know, you look at, you know, some of the Ukrainian leaders before Zelensky, you know, and you put them, you know, up against Putin, you know, I think you'd find some similarities. So, you know, I do find the narrative about wars troubling. It's always this right or wrong. And, you know, going back to your thesis, some of which I read, not all of it. I mean, you know, I do have a life, but, you know, there's sort of this idea of, you know, it's almost like the circle of abuse, you know, and you look at Afghanistan, you know, you've got, you know, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, these small factions, and then you start dropping bombs on villages from drones, and this is their recruitment drive. You know, you basically, it just becomes this cycle of revenge. You know, the Godfather, when Michael Corleone goes to Sicily, you know, the village of Corleone, he says, "We're all the men," and his guard says, "They're all dead from vendettas." You know, and it's just like, is this cycle? It seems to, I think, the rest of the world that this cycle has more impetus, speed, and power on the continent of Africa than it does elsewhere. I'm not sure that that's true, but certainly it's the impression. And as you quite rightly remarked, the tone of that article is very much portraying that narrative of, you know, it's a fucking shit show there. You'll never stop it.
Yeah. So the thing is, I'll give you another example of this, is that so Boko Haram and or whatever they're calling them,
Al-Shabaab
in northern Mozambique. Al-Shabaab is slightly different, but I'll give you these two examples, right? Because they have very strong, in some senses, very strong correlations, and even in that it's north-south. So in Nigeria, the south is Christian, the north is Islamic, and you know, there's a whole lot of talk about, Boko Haram is about you know, making a caliphate and stopping the Christians and all this stuff. What it's fundamentally about is that the slightly richer south has been taking the resources from the north and never giving anything back. So what you have is a whole lot of unemployed, disaffected youths to whom Islam answers a question to their immediate problem. It could have been, you know, 20 years before that, it would have been Marxism. It can be political ideology. It can be religious ideology. It's exactly the same in Mozambique at the moment. We're in a war that we absolutely should not be. And it is because the south, the old Frelimo areas, have looted the resources of the north for 20 years. Miyakuta writes on this a lot, actually. And now particularly that gains great traction because of gas fines. And now these northerners are seeing all these trucks and shells and things, shell pumping gas and taking stuff. They're still hungry. Someone comes along and says, well, this gun and God help you, free you from the northerners. There you go. You got yourself a war. So it's about, you know, it may not, you know, so then it's easy to just go, oh, you know, Islam's taking over the continent. It's not. Islam's filling a hole that states, you know, that states are creating. In the past, it was Marxism, the great liberation moment, you know. In 20 years, it may well be, I don't know, belief in AI for all I know, but it's about local factors. It's not about a global religion.
Yeah, interesting. Let's have another track. What have we got next? I think it's Nick Cave, isn't it?
Nick Cave. You have to have some Nick Cave. You can't sit in a desert island without Nick Cave, because all the sun and sunshine's going to get you eventually. You're going to bring yourself down a bit.
Let's have a listen.
No, this is my three first relationships, all in one song.
Right. Far from me.
For you, dear, I was born. For you, I was raised up. For you, I've lived, and for you, I will die. For you, I'm dying now. You were my mad little lover, in a world where everybody fucks everybody else over. You who are so far from me, so far from me. Across some cold neurotic sea, far from
me. There's also a great line in that song as well. It's good to see you doing so well, but really, can't you find someone else to run and tell? Because it drops. So it starts like all like that, and then it drops.
Yeah.
Boom. That's another album I listened to almost endlessly from 98, 99, 2000 through three really seriously the state I was in emotionally, and having not dealt with issues from teenage years, I shouldn't have been allowed to enter into any kind of any form of emotional involvement. So it was terrible. And as fantastic as the people I was involved with, and I think you know two of them, as fantastic as they are, they're just really not the right people for me. I wasn't the right person for them, and the whole thing's just super destructive.
I mean, it's a learning process. Relationships. I always think that it's the relationships you have and the ones that fail that allow you to have a successful one. Like you can't.
Exactly.
You can't figure it out. You can't just walk into a successful relationship. You have to have had failures. You had to push the boundaries and had shit blow up in your face, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and in fact, actually, the song after the video games, Lana Del Rey, probably is the reflection of that, because if I think, not that it's specifically linked to a relationship now, but in a way, it kind of reflects on how I feel about my relationship now. You know, it's lighter, it's happier, it's in a way, it's sexier. It's not, you know, it's. I mean, it kind of has sort of a profound something to it, but in a way, it's also a little bit frivolous. And I think, you know, that learning that you can have that as well in a relationship is so important, because, you know, like at first, like everything was, you know, like the Nick Cave song, you know, it's intense, it's striving. You believe that that's what you've got to have in love, and otherwise it's not love. And, you know, to then realize that you've also got to have the fun and the bullshit and the mundanity, the mundane, the frivolous, the all of it, I think is kind of is as important, really.
Yeah. What's have you read? Have you looked at Nick Cave's Red Hand files at all?
Yes, I read quite a lot of this. Yeah, I do. I find. Yeah, I mean, I have. I've always. I don't know if you've ever read his novel. It's like sandpapering your brain.
The Ass and the Angel.
Yeah, yeah, that got passed around the Dahab when everybody's also just not in it, not balanced, and we're all reading
Yeah.
that.
I read some of it back in the day, like in the 90s.
Yeah.
I remember the cover, yeah, silver cover, but
Reading that,
I
reading
definitely
Outsider.
didn't. Yeah, I didn't finish that one. It was like, what the fuck, dude?
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do read a lot of his. I do read a lot of his stuff, and I think, you know, you read his stuff on grief. I mean, his son fell off a cliff, you know, in the safest country in the world, and the most just fell off a cliff.
So I mean, there's a couple of quotes there that I mean, I literally think should be, you know, it should be more sort of widely known. He says, grief is the terrible reminder of the depths of our love.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just saying it makes me want to cry. It's so true.
Yeah.
And then the other one he says, which unfortunately I used recently in condolences to somebody, was he says, in time there is a way, not out of grief, but deep within it. And I think that is much more accurate than the saying of, you know, into all, you know, wounds heal in time. It's not true. You find a way, you don't find your way out of grief. A wound doesn't heal. You basically learn to live within grief, carrying it around. You know, it's another skin, and you never shake it.
Yeah, completely agree. I think, you know, for a guy who started out, you know, tearing things up in industrial bands in you know, in Germany and the UK, he's a profound lyricist, and I think the album that's on. Damn it, how can I forget the name of that album?
The Boatman's Call. The Boatman's Call.
Boatman's Call. It's just the lyrics in that and the next album as well. Let Love In, not Let Love In. The album that followed that. It's just two kind of piano EPs, piano ones. Yeah. The lyrics are incredible, but then they always are. I think the more you read him writing to specific issues in prose, in plain text, you can see why he's such a great lyricist. Because it's so hard. You know, you can be obscure in lyrics. In writing, I don't know if you write any poetry, but you can be obscure and you can give a sense of your meaning. But to be clear in prose in the way he has is an incredibly difficult thing. You know, to detail things is something as difficult as grief is difficult.
It's difficult. When we were in lockdown, he did the
movie.
Have you
on the piano,
Alexandra Palace? Yeah, Alexandra Palace.
Yeah, I watched it.
And he did a live. Have you watched that? It's
I watched it.
Incredible. So, I mean, also just at that time, you know, we were sort of locked in. We rented it. We bought a screen projector for the kids ages ago. It was like a Christmas gift. And so it was at night and the kids had gone to bed, and we basically lay in bed and we put the screen up on there. And I mean, it gave me goosebumps. But lyrics-wise, Palaces of Montezuma. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, yeah. This song's actually he did the song. He did Far From Me on there. But yes.
Yeah. So the Palaces of Montezuma, the lyrics of that are just off the charts. Incredible. It's basically saying, I would give you everything that I have. And, you know, it doesn't matter what, you know, and he just lists all these bizarre, incredible, you know, things that he would give as a gesture of his love. It's incredible. Let's listen to your next one, and then I'll ask you a few more questions. So we're going to.
This is, in a way, is a bit of kind of stoner candy floss.
I love this
which you would have to have it. Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah, it was This Will Get High by the Beach, but the 16-year-old in me wouldn't go with that one. Also, gets stuck in my head for days.
Yeah. what the live, she did this in Jules Holland on the BBC thing.
Swinging in the backyard,
Incredible
pull up in
performance.
your fast car, whistling my name.
It's the imagery to this is what I love so much.
Open up a beer and you say get over here and play a video game. I'm in his favorite sundress, watching me get undressed, take our body downtown. I say you the bestest, leaning for a big kiss, put his favorite perfume on, go play a video game. It's you, it's all for you. Everything I do, tell you all the time. Heaven is a place on earth with you. Tell me all the things you wanna do. I heard that you like the bad girls, honey. Is that true? It's better than I ever even knew. They say that the world was built for two, only worth living if somebody is loving you. And baby, now you do.
Amazing.
Yeah, because I give you some opera, and I couldn't find any. I thought, I should at least find some kind of obscure indie band to put on, but I couldn't. So I went opera and Lana Del Rey as a combination.
I mean, it's an obvious combination. So we're coming towards the end. We've been on 2 hours already. What's the most important thing you've learned so far in your life?
Oh, jeez. Oh, not to answer questions like that. So one, like a weird thing, and I don't know if it's the most important, but one of the things I've realized about myself recently is how often people misread me taking the piss out of myself for arrogance. It's amazing. Yeah. It's something I've missed my whole life. That's what I've never understood is that people misread me taking the laugh out of myself for arrogance, which is really, I don't know how that relates. It's just a recent insight that I found quite interesting.
People just don't get sarcasm. It's dangerous. Let me rephrase the question, because it's something I think about a lot. So when you were in your 20s, let's say, at some point, and you were having a low point, as we all did, we all fluctuated, right? I say all, I mean, people that I'm friends with, because you have emotional intelligence. And at some point in your 20s, whether it was, hangover or just state of your mind, you would have felt pretty low, and you would have felt like life's a bit shit, or you felt that you were a bit shit. What now, if you could have appeared to yourself in a hallucinogenic trip back in your 20s, what would you tell your 20-year-old something who's basically lying in a darkened room, listening to Tom Waits, thinking, fuck this shit?
Too much Nick Cave, too much down. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, I've also thought about that, and like you kind of, you want to go for the ones, the big ones. Oh, it will be okay, and you're not sure that it will yet. You know what I mean? So even 20 years later, nearly 30 years later, I wouldn't be able to go back to that person and say, it gets better or it gets easier or any of that. I suppose what I would say is just don't be so hard on yourself. You know what I mean? Like beating yourself up doesn't make any of this easier. And on the back of that is that, so sure, I mean, the 90s, and I think we were fortunate to be the age we were in the time we were, and weirdly enough to be at Maritzburg Varsity because of what it was at the time. And also, again, a very specific time and place for a thing that is now completely a different place. But I think the other thing is that, so the one is just go easier, just go easier on yourself, you know what I mean? Like, but the other would be, I suppose, the things are more fun in some ways, the easier to, so it doesn't easier. but they're a lot funnier. Maybe because you don't take them as seriously now. You know, you'll learn not to. So you'll learn not to take the things so seriously anymore. I mean, so things still hurt, things still bother me. Things that bothered me about myself when I was 16 still bothers me in some ways, that kind of thing. But I suppose it's just A, don't be so hard on yourself, and B, in a way, it becomes easier to roll with what's going on. And also you find that it's also easier because you can go and do the things you want to do, and it doesn't fucking matter what people care, because, and ironically, they're the things I did then anyway. You know, it's fishing, it's computer games, it's doing shit by myself. But you kind of let yourself do that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. You say, I mean, you say you wouldn't tell yourself, you know, don't worry, it'll all work out, it gets easier. I mean, do you not think that precisely for those reasons, it is, do you not think it's going to be okay? And do you not think it has kind of got easier? Just simply nothing, like objectively, nothing's changed. But like these days, you just say, oh, fuck it. You say fuck it a lot more. You say, whatever, fuck it.
Yeah. So look, I don't know if it's also a context thing. I mean, it's difficult to be where I am at the moment.
Sure.
And I don't mean that constantly.
No, I know, but we go through different phases, and you know, things, pressure builds and pressure difficult. Releases, and yeah. So yes, obviously it gets easier. I mean, it gets easier because you care less and it hurts less. And the things that get you down don't get you down as much. But then other things come and get you down. Like, I couldn't have told 20-year-old me that I'd lie awake one night and worry about SARS. And yet I've lain awake and worried about SARS, you know, whereas 20-year-old me was lying awake wondering if anyone would ever love him, you know, fall in love and have this big thing that you were supposed to be in love about, you know, the things that were written in the books we were reading and the music we were listening to. When you say SARS, you're talking about tax returns, right?
Tax returns, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
South African Revenue Service.
Revenue Service.
So it was like
not bird.
And look, the other thing you've got to understand is I don't have kids, right? So I think it gives me a completely different perspective, but it also, in some ways, doesn't give me a perspective people with kids have, and then that I can see in my brother has it, and I think in some ways, I think. From what I see in my friends and my kids, I think having kids, my friends and my brother, I think having kids gets your head out of your own ass. You know, so it's easier for me to sit here and overthink everything. Yeah. You know,
I mean, that's definitely true from my perspective, but that's the double-edged sword as well. You know.
Because it's so I can contemplate the fact that the future is shit. Whereas if I had kids, it would be very hard. And I find this in the future studies work and scenario work I do with people. It's the strategy stuff, you know, risk mitigation and stuff. You know, it's very difficult. It's much easier for me to say, look, guys, things are getting shit. You got to pull yourself together, because it's so difficult to say that to someone who has kids. You know, it's so difficult to say that things aren't getting better. Where we stand now, globally, the future looks bleak. You know, that person goes home to kids who are, you know, 10, 20. And so you can't do that. You've got to constantly offer multiple sides and multiple views, which I don't have to do for myself.
Do you think the world is actually getting more shit, or is it simply have more data? No, I mean, or do you have more data? And is this simply aware of how shit the world is? Yeah, because it's, you know, somebody, let's put it this way, somebody that was 47 years old when you were 25 may have said precisely the same thing, you know, or, you know, 30 years ago. I mean, I'm not sure. Well, I mean, I know for a fact, you know, that when in the 90s, there were a lot of people who were saying, you know, this is the beginning of the end. Things are going to get pretty shit. We had a sort of different take on it because we were young and privileged and nobody was now watching us. But certainly, you know, I remember there being an element of, you know, a lot of people my father's age. My dad was quite optimistic. I remember him being reasonably optimistic. Or it was sort of, I remember him saying, well, it can only get better than what we've had over the last 20 or 30 years. It was, I don't know if that's optimistic, but it was like, you know, it surely can't be any fucking worse than what we've been dealing with. But, you know, I mean, you're not optimistic about the future.
No, look, I'm no more optimistic about the future than I was at any time, really. So I don't. It's difficult to explain, right? Because it's one of the things that makes me pretty. It's one of the things that makes me good at strategy, particularly kind of the foresight related stuff, the future stuff. Is that I'm not. I don't really care. Is another way to say it. It's like I don't really care if it gets better. And not because it's shit. If you know what I mean, I'm not. And I again, this goes back to I wonder if this is the not having children thing. You know, I'm not emotionally invested in a future for the human race.
Yeah,
I'm more emotionally invested in the patch of one of the very last patches of KZN misbelts that our property is on our property. I'm more invested in that will probably be gone in 5 years than I am about humans saving themselves. So I think I'm not for me it's not a question of getting better or getting worse. For me it's a question, it's a kind of an academic exercise in how it changes. So
I can see that.
Some of that change will be good, some of that change will be bad. That's what it's always been. Although objectively, there is no question that for more South Africans, life is better now for more South Africans than it was in 1995. There is no question that life is better for more people on Earth than it was in the 1800s. It's a function of how you define progress, right?
Yeah.
But it's also a function of what's it called? You only know the world as it is, so this is your point of reference.
Yeah.
You know, so it's difficult to know how much better things are because this is how we've always known it. So which is why, you know, age gives you perspective, because you can look back on times and it gives you a sense of how things change, but then you age with it, so that perspective is also warped. Good. So I don't advocate for, because so look, I mean, at an ideological level, I think fundamentally the systems we've built the modern world out of are completely wrong. You cannot have a system a system that defines itself through constant growth on a finite resource. You can't do it. So we're screwed. You know what I mean? Well, do I think that'll change? Yes, I do. Do I mean that's the world is better or worse? I don't know. Some things will be better, some things will be worse. You'll have less toothache, but you know, you might end up more, you know, back pains from sitting over a computer. It's for me, it's not a zero-sum game. It's a question of complexity in that the good and the bad, and then how you weigh it up.
But
you know what I mean?
Going back to that objectively, I understand that, and I also understand it's your job to predict and to mark and to record, to use data points to predict, to analyze. You're an analyst. But going back to the question about you, speaking to yourself in the 20s, like what is your future look like? Do you think you're going to be happier, more sad, or just the same in a different in different settings?
So no, sure. So I think in many ways I'm happier than I was in my 20s. You know, one of the things I would tell myself if I had a regret about the 1990s is that I didn't fish when I was in Maritzburg. I didn't fish these water enough. That water was here. I mean, I'm fishing 20 years later where we've lost half of it. And I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. So it's those kind of things, you know. Am I happier than I was in my 20s? Probably because I'm better, you know, I'm more at ease with myself. So yes, I mean, the trajectory is positive personally, and that's why I said, you know, what would I say to myself? I would say, you know, don't hard on yourself, because I think that's one of the things you learn is to stop beating yourself up. You know, there are enough people around who are going to try and kick your ass. There's no point in you trying to add to it.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And just, you know, just try and do the stuff you're doing. that's the other thing I would tell myself. I would say I spend a lot of time getting hung up on doing things I thought I should be doing, rather than things I wanted to do. Look, I also mostly did the things I wanted to, but there certainly are times when I did things that I thought, I don't know if we've all done it, but in a sense, playing a role I thought I should be playing rather than just going and doing what I wanted to do.
Interesting.
But yeah, so yes, those are the kind of things I would say, but I wouldn't sort of say, they're quite basic things. One of the things I tell myself is, and it's the cliches, wear sunscreen, man. Really bad sun damage from years of working on boats.
I don't have that issue. I tell my kids whatever, but you will recall I didn't really enjoy daylight hours. I would come out of my room at about 4:30 in the afternoon, have breakfast, and be like, right, what's this day got in store for me? So that wasn't really an issue for me.
Cool. I earned my living. Earned my living in the tropical sun for 10 years. So I kind of that's how
you see it here. I mean, you see it in the Caribbean. I mean, people look like handbags. They're leathery. It takes its toll. Right. Let's do the last. Let's come back to this. But let's do the last song. Let's get this final one.
So this is an interest of mine at the moment. It's a great example of it. I'm really interested in the moments in covers of songs, particularly covers done by women, because of songs that are famous by men. It interests me how a different voice and tone gives completely different sense of the song. So first, it's a great song. This is the Bruce Springsteen, I'm on Fire, sung by Amy McDonald. And what I love about it is first the emphasis she gives it, but also that you can hear her Scott. I think it's just such an interesting idea that you change the way we perceive meaning in songs, particularly so bound by the way it's delivered. And you can see it either in songs, like when, but if you remember, again in the 90s, there was a trance version of Over the Rainbow. I don't know if you remembered it, but
I don't remember it offhand.
Not so. It's this kind of thing where it changes your perception of a great song. There's another really famous example by a punk band called the Dead Brains. I also can't believe I didn't include any punk in any of this. It's obviously a contemplative stage. There's no screaming loud music because there's great release in screaming music because you can run into somebody and headbutt them. But
there really is.
So they did a song, a cover of "And Then He Kissed Me," and they never changed men punk singing and never changed the he part. So it's punk voice singing "Then He Kissed Me," and it gives a very different sense of what the song's about. Instead of the chiffon wearing kind of. And I a whole playlist just of covers by women. I mean, it's a great song, and I like her. I like her voice very much. But she gives so the change in accent, the change in voice gives such great nuance to a song. That's it's masculine and strong and about being on fire listen. For a woman, and it's sung differently.
Let's listen.
Yep.
Hey little girl, is your daddy home? Did he go and leave you all alone? Oh yes, I got a bad desire. Oh, I'm on fire. Tell me now, baby, is it good to you? Can it do to you the things that I do? Oh yes, I'm gonna take you higher. Oh, I'm on fire. Sometimes it's like someone took a knife, baby, edgy and dull, and cut a 6-inch valley through the middle of my skull. And now I wake up with a sheet soaking wet and a freight train running through the middle of my head. Only you can cool my desire. Oh, I'm on fire.
So I love the original of that.
Yeah.
And whilst I can appreciate that, I mean, I was surprised. The first thing, I was surprised you put that down, because when I first heard it,
Yeah.
I was like, this is fucking country music, man.
Yeah.
And it's got an element of country.
It's worse. I think it's Glaswegian. It's not even country.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's arguable. So
it's
yeah, I was surprised, but also I was I don't appreciate that as much, because I love the original of that.
I also love
is one of my top 50 songs of all time. I love it. I've heard it 10,000 times.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, for me is it's about otherness. It's about the opportunity to occupy a different place, right?
Yeah.
So it's about opportunity to see something differently, and often that's about seeing it, about a different perspective on it. So it doesn't. So I do like your voice. I mean, I do like the song.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song. I was just surprised.
Yeah. So it's also got a great. I mean, that line. Sometimes it's like someone took an knife, baby, Adrian doll, and it was the sixth thing. But it's and I mean, for the whole playlist, I can't think of any of the others, but it really is. It's about it's about ways of conceiving of yourself outside of yourself. It's about having perspectives change, and I find that really interesting. And I also find it really liberating, because you listen to the song 10,000 times and it has such deep meaning to you in so many ways.
Yeah.
And now you've had it changed. I'm not saying this is the case for all covers. Many covers are complete crap, because they're unable to effectively translate that into something of their own. I mean, can you imagine taking on Bruce Springsteen? Who takes on Bruce Springsteen songs?
Yeah, very, very few.
So that's what I find so interesting about it.
It's definitely interesting. So I pulled the lyrics from your choice of songs, and let's have a look. Tom Waits, I hope that I don't fall in love with you. Well, I can see that you are lonesome just like me, and it being late, you'd like some company. Violent Femmes, 444 for my headaches and 555 for my lonely. The Cure, just like heaven. Opened up my eyes. Oh, so The Cure, just like heaven. I opened up my eyes and find myself alone, alone, alone above a raging sea.
Yeah.
We've got Alana Del Rey. Yeah. They say the world was built for two, only worth living if somebody is loving you. And baby, now you do. I'm on fire. Hey, little girl, is your daddy home? Did he go and leave you all alone?
So I'll give you one more for that. So the Casta Diva, the one that starts, she's singing a prayer to the moon, the beautiful diva, the pure goddess.
Yeah.
And she's talking about how I don't know if you looked it up, but anyway, it's in some ways she's asking for blessings to for aloneness in the world. It's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I suppose it makes perfect sense. So I'm fascinated by this idea of a sense of loneliness, but also complete satisfaction. I'm probably happiest when I'm by myself in many ways. And I think if I look back on it, it has a lot to do with what what boarding school left me with in some ways, and it's deep distrust of groups, particularly groups of men. Absolutely trust them. And I think you can. I have a theory that the IQ of a group of men is directly of the opposite in proportion. So where the one gets bigger, the other gets smaller. There is
inverse.
Inversely proportionate to the number of men in it. So the more men you get together, the dumber we get. And
it's hard to argue with that.
So what grew out of a fundamental loneliness, having sort of been actively ostracized, I became so interested in this idea that if I'm so happy at being alone, why does being ostracized hurt so much?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I don't know that I've ever solved it. But that's, I suppose, if you look as a cross section through the songs, an interesting exercise. It's called vertical reading. It's a literary. What you've done there is a literary technique, research technique, thematic reading. So yeah, I would say it has to do with that. It has to do with that. And I have that constant. I still have that constant kind of attention.
Interesting. I mean, you have. You're in a relationship, and I presume there's a relationship that also allows you to have your own space, personal space, because not all relationships do, and that's really important. And people with, I think, a high emotional intelligence allow other people that space and that time to do their own thing, and understand, I think, after some time that when you go in and you sit down and you do fly tying for an hour and a half, that it's not because you need flies, it's because you want to spend an hour and a half. Yeah, that's it. Interesting. Okay, so you're on desert island. You have the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare with you. Please consider what other book you would want on the desert island. And you said?
E.N.M. Banks. Oh, this was a tough one. It's difficult. So, I mean, my immediate response was The Lord of the Rings, just because I've just have such a long relationship with that book. I've got Tolkien's initials tattooed on me. But there's something I think the world's greatest loss to tiny loss of anyone I didn't know that hurt me the most was the death of Ian Banks, because it's this idea of never opening up another E.N.M. There will be no more E.N.M. Banks books, and that's tragic. I mean, the man died at 50. That's just, I don't know if you've read it. I don't know if you read E.N.M. Banks. It's just a great sci-fi. It's a fantastic world to get lost in.
I've only read The Wasp Factory.
Yeah. So that was his first book. Yeah, well, there was the other one of the 90s books that used to get passed around.
Oh my God.
So the Angel. No, so he writes in two. He writes as Ian Banks. He writes, which is kind of real world-ish. Yeah. And then E.N.M. Banks is sci-fi. And I read a lot of sci-fi. I mean, probably for pretty obvious reasons. But his is particularly good because it's really... It asks a lot of the things we've been talking about. What's better, what's not. What is progress, what is not. He has a utopian society called the Culture, but it exists in a dystopian galaxy. So if you're in the Culture, everything is utopia. You never get old, you never get sick, you have whatever you want. You can turn drugs on and off, you can do whatever you want. But the galaxy that it exists in is completely as the world is. There are developing people, there are violence. So it asks so many of these questions that we're talking and talks about. And I suppose The Algebraist is not a culture novel, but it asks a lot of these similar questions. Just a great world, great place, great, really well written. It's just a book I really enjoy.
Interesting.
I've not, because I could read it. I don't know how long I'm on this desert island, but I've read it about 4 times, and I could easily read it another 10.
Yeah.
In between Shakespeare, and I've read more Shakespeare than I like to admit. I mean, I do have a master's degree in English. I read and taught way more Shakespeare than I like to admit.
Yeah, and the Bible, Firestarter.
Firestarter. We did this exercise at Treverton where because it's a Christian school. They stuck us in the Mgeni River Valley when it was a bit wilder, with a Bible and only water and bag for hours to find ourselves. Yeah. I didn't read it then. I'm not likely to read it.
I think that was your opportunity. All right. And then finally, one luxury item. You said I probably wouldn't allow you your first choice, but I think I probably would, save for the fly tying kit. What was your first choice?
Yeah, it would be a fly rod. I mean, come on, I'm on a desert island. There has to be something to catch. Come on. Both in terms of, there's a chance, look, if it's uninhabited, there's a chance this is some of the best water you're going to get. There's a chance they haven't seen a fly. So there's a good chance, but
Yeah.
then there's also I would eat. There's a practical component to it.
I totally agree.
But like as a functional thing, hell, I'd take a Leatherman just because
Yeah.
what have I learned the last 10 years about prepping is how much I use a Leatherman.
Yeah, totally. That's this has been fun. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah, it's a hell of a lot of
2.5
fun, actually.
hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I've
Yeah,
got to
so
go.
did I, actually.
I saw Sasky leaving with one of the children, so I think I've got to go back and deal with the other one, or make sure that it's not feeding, sleeping in the dog basket or something. Anyway.
Yeah. So what does Craig,
so-
Craig say? Silence is golden unless you have a 2-year-old.
We're beyond that stage now, but I better go check on him. It's been fun. Thank
Cool.
you for taking the time.
Thank you.
I'll download this and I'll let you have a listen and send my love to Prue.
It's an interesting exercise. I may turn it in on you. It's for youth experience. It's a very interesting exercise to talk about yourself like this. It's very, very interesting. It's definitely we should do one with you. Just so you can see what I mean. It's a very, very interesting exercise. It's not something that one does. You know what I mean?
That's why I wanted to do this, and it's been interesting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I found out about you today. I've known you for 25 years or something, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I never knew about you. So I've really enjoyed it, and thanks for taking the time to speak to me.
No, thanks. That was fun. Cool. So,
cool, man. Enjoy the rest.
Send my best to Sass, please.
I will.
And enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, buddy. Speak to you later.
Cool, man. Cheers.
Bye.